Well, good morning, Trinity friends, and welcome to our adult education program. This morning, we are continuing our discussion on the rise and fall of King David. We're generally following the summer lectionary, which details some of that path, but we're going a little bit deeper and telling all the stories, not just the good parts version that we often will get from the lectionary. So we're so grateful that you're here. The first week we talked about the rise of the monarchy in the Hebrew culture and how that was kind of against God's will, but God acquiesced and kind of set them on a path for conflict. And last week we heard a bit more about the story of David, a lot of those stories that we're very familiar with. And this week I'm so happy to be joined by the Reverend Dena Whalen, a vicar of Church of the Advocate, a colleague here at Trinity, to be in conversation with us. Thank you so much, Dena, for joining us today and being willing to dive into one of the dicier stories in Scripture, if you will.
It's good to be here, David.
Well, so now we're at the point in the story where, David's now this well-known quantity, at least among Saul and kind of those in power in the kingdom right now. And then something kind of interesting begins to happen in the relationships as David gets kind of grafted in almost into the monarchy, into the court there in the Hebrew culture, in the Hebrew kingdom. And that's the relationship between David and Jonathan. And Jonathan is Saul's son, his eldest son, the one who would inherit the throne. And so what do you make of this relationship? Tell us a little bit about what you remember about this relationship, Dena, and how it speaks to you as you think about the context and then our context today.
Well, I remember the first time I read this as a younger adult and being so struck by it because I had never heard this kind of language, especially in Scripture, being used of two men, right?
Right.
And certainly in our culture today, this language is much too soft for two male friends, So it really struck me, and it led me to go read, and I don't have it anymore. I can't remember the name of it, but one of the early writers, from the medieval times, wrote a book about spiritual friendship, and it led me to that, thinking, what is this? What kind of friendship is this? The biblical notes, I went back and read it again, so it'd be fresh in my mind. And they all are very clear to say this was a political affiliation, or this was a treaty, or loved implies political loyalty.
It doesn't read that way at all, though, does it?
So it looks like right after David had killed the Philistine Goliath, it's almost like David is in the court, or and Jonathan's there, of course, right with his father, and so it says when David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul, so much that right there he made a covenant with him, and because of this deep love, and even stripped himself. Jonathan took off his royal robe that he was wearing and gave it to David, took off his armor and gave it to David, and took off his sword and his bow and his belt. So, I mean, right then and there, it's like he handed over his his right to the throne, almost. All these symbolic things just gave him.
Because I mean, let's think about this in political terms, right? Like Jonathan is the next in line for the throne, right? I mean, like if something happens to Saul, or whenever something happens to Saul, whether by old age or war, Jonathan's going to wear the crown, right? I mean, that's how kings work, right? I mean, that's not how the judges work, but that's how the kings work. But here, Jonathan, you're exactly right. He literally kind of lays down all the trappings of being a king and being a warrior. to David. But I think you're right that there's more to this than the politics. And if you want to read this portion of the story, it's 1 Samuel 18. The idea of your soul being bound to the soul of another person, that's not the language of politics. It's not the language of kings and monarchs. I mean, this is the language of profound friendship. I mean, think about your best friend. I mean, can you even say about your best friend that you feel like your souls are bound together? And if so, what does that look like? I mean, so what is a friendship in this context where David is eventually going to be a rival for the throne? What does it look like to be friends in the midst of that context? It's fast, and then it speaks to the deeper things of friendship that we kind of struggle with in our modern world. Friendship is not an easy thing always in our modern world, as busy as we are.
And I think my son is still in the Army Reserves, but he did 3 tours of duty. Mm-hmm. And thinking about him, and I saw one of those Iraq kind of movies recently, and it was able to convey that deep soul connection from soldier to soldier when you're out there in the trenches together. So I think that men that have fought side by side might experience this easier than men that play golf together. I mean, because life is intense at that moment.
And this is the context, right? I mean, like David literally brings in the severed head of Goliath, and Jonathan's been out fighting his own battle. So like, that's a really great observation, really, is that these are 2 soldiers who have been fighting not together, but they've been fighting the same war in the same battle, so they identify each other in that way. That's a great observation.
And I think sometimes you can see where there is greatness, or maybe even celebrity in one person. It's a natural, it's just who they're meant to be. And somebody sees that and the love overwhelms the competitiveness. And it's like, I'm here to, to back you up and support you no matter what.
Right.
And, I mean, it says they made covenants, and later Jonathan made not only a covenant with David, but to the Davidic line, so that it was kind of a foretelling that, you're going to be king, and even to your whole dynasty, I give my loyalty. So, but Jonathan, he saved David's life a few times because Saul was after him from the get-go.
Right. So, I mean, there's a sense that Jonathan kind of betrays his own king and father to honor this friendship, this covenant friendship. I don't know if I'm comfortable calling it just a covenant, because I feel like a covenant friendship feels gets at the intimacy, because it's not just this covenant and treaty. There's something so much deeper. It makes me think about how cultures differ, particularly in male to male friendships, in terms of their comfort level with intimacy and physical affection. And our culture is famously uncomfortable oftentimes with portraying healthy examples of friendships between men. Mm-hmm. And you can travel to other countries and African countries and some Arabic countries and even Asian countries where when men are friends, they hold hands. They walk around holding hands,
each other on the cheek,
they kiss each other on the cheeks. And this is a place where I feel like our culture doesn't do well. If you have 2 hetero men, if they're going to hug each other, they're going to try to be as masculine as possible, pound each other on the back as hard as possible, there's lots of men that have really enjoyed the COVID physical distance in our country, I think, because, there's none of that. And let's name that for what it is. Oftentimes that's latent kind of homophobia, that's kind of ingrained in our culture. There are some folks who get so uncomfortable with the intimacy between David and Jonathan that they assumed there must have been some kind of sexual relationship between them. And that's not to say that there wasn't, which would be fine if there was, but
Right.
I think it says something about the need to normalize this kind of affection between same gender people. That this is a normal part of our human longing is to be physically connected with one another. And Lord knows we have missed that during the 15 months of the pandemic. We have missed that.
I think too that we put so much pressure on the marriage covenant between two people as though they should be everything to one another.
So true.
I mean, I love my husband, but I've got 2 or 3 lifelong girlfriends that in some parts of my life, that's who I take my soul to, you know.
Right.
Even though, you know, I'm devoted to him for life, it's, you know, those friendships that help us. And these 2 women knew me when I was 7 years old. So it's
and it can put a lot of stress on a marriage if you not only expect your partner, you know, whether it's same gender or different gender, you know, to it puts so much pressure for that person to not only be your marriage partner, but your best friend or only friend.
Right.
That's a lot of pressure. And I do think that's a fairly recent development and expectation in our culture.
COVID has exacerbated that. COVID.
This is very true. When you only see 1 or 2 other people, like, you know, for a year, you kind of you're forced into that situation.
Oh gosh.
It's like maybe everybody needs to take a vacation, not just with their partner, but like with people who aren't their partners, just you know, just to give each other a break and to reestablish some of those friendships. I mean, isn't that some of the work that we've been doing as a church and as human beings as we've come out of COVID? Is we've sought out our friends and said, let's go have coffee, let's go have lunch. I have so much to tell you, because there's something different between telling someone in physical presence than telling somebody over Zoom. You can reach out and you can touch somebody. You can put a hand on the back. You can hug. You can see all that. You feel all that. And certainly, I think this relationship between David and Jonathan reminds us in a very poignant way what we've missed and what we desire,
and what we should invest in. You know, I mean, a lot of us have friends that live a far way away, but if we're lucky that 1 or 2, we know that if somebody does get sick or something does happen, I just know that those precious 1 or 2 people that I don't care where they are and what they're doing, they're going to drop what they're doing and get to my side, and I would do it for them, you know.
And it's that person you call when you have a tragedy or a triumph. And it's like the next person you call after you inform your spouse or your partner about it. It's that next person you go, this is the person who has to know about this.
You know, they'll share your joy and they're right with you. So
the person who will take your side even after they tell you you're wrong.
And then say, we're going to get you out of this.
That's right. What
Jonathan did. His last when and of course he and David, I think they didn't see each other for quite a while, but when Jonathan died by Saul's side in battle, Jonathan made his way there, and let me just he wrote this beautiful poem
please.
Wrote the Lamentations, which is in the 1st chapter of 2 Samuel. We'll read the whole thing. But so David wrote, Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. So he says this about both Saul and Jonathan. And then at the very last verse, he says, I'm distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. And of course, back then, they all had several wives, and women didn't have
Right.
mutual relationships really as much as we know today. But yeah, it was just a powerful example of friendship
And
and
and we
love.
can we can talk. Well, I think we'll talk probably next week a little bit more about kind of Saul's relationship with David, which was deeply in conflict. There was there was lots of bad stuff going on there. But I think what we can touch on today with Jonathan is how he does save David's life from his father's kind of enraged jealousy of David's popularity and success and things like that. And Jonathan, at least twice, as I was reading back through it, goes to David and says, and he says this in 1 Samuel 19, my father Saul's trying to kill you. Therefore be on guard tomorrow morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. I'll go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. If I learn anything, I will tell you. So, I mean, he's almost spying as he's trying to protect, which in the context of a monarchy is like, you don't do that. You don't, that's treason.
Right. Taking a risk for sure, I would say. Yeah.
And the first time he kind of convinces his dad not to do much, not to do anything to David, but then, Saul can't seem to contain his jealousy, and then it happens again in the next chapter, in Samuel, 1 Samuel 20, he talks about David is talking to Jonathan now, like, what have I done? What's my guilt? What is my sin against your father, and that he's trying to take my life? And Jonathan says, perish the thought, you shall not die. My father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. Why should my father hide this from me? But then David swore, your father knows well that you like me. And he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this or he will be grieved. So now, Jonathan's time as a spy has suddenly evaporated. His reputation precedes him. Saul knows where Jonathan's loyalties lie. And then, so they go through this thing about, Jonathan's going to go and try to figure out if Saul's really going to kill him and really wants to kill him, or if he's just angry again. And then, as it turns out, he does, and they have this, weird, complicated system about a kid shooting an arrow at a certain distance, and it's a code for them to know. So it's like this secret code that only they'll know because they realize the danger is intense. And then, I think this may be the last time they see each other. They part ways here. And this is such a poignant moment. Jonathan sends the boy who'd shot the arrows and unwittingly gave the code that David's life was in mortal danger. So Jonathan sends that boy away, and then David rises from beside a stone heap, prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He bowed 3 times, and they kissed each other and wept with each other, and David wept the more. And Jonathan said to David, go in peace, since both of us have sworn in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my descendants and your descendants forever. He got up and left, and Jonathan went into the city. And so here these are 2 friends who are parting, who are almost forced to part, but they kind of renew that covenant, like you said earlier, not just between themselves, but with their entire line and houses, which we will actually see pick up later in the story how that all plays out. But it's just this incredibly touching scene of 2 people leaving. I mean, in your head you think of the Hollywood stories of the couple who are in love, who part at the airport or something like this. But these are 2 friends. These are 2 friends who love each other dearly, who have looked out for each other and saved each other's lives. And if you have a deep friendship like that, like, what an incredible blessing to have that kind of friendship. And I think that is missing for a number of men in our world these days. There's that great book, Bowling Alone, where it talks about the lack of those kind of intimate friendships for a lot of men. So, if nothing else, this can be a story to remind us, go be friends with people.
Right.
Be friends.
And rekindle those old friendships that maybe you've been before, So
yeah, and if something has come between you and your friend, think about what might have come between David and Jonathan.
Oh, sure.
And their friendship managed to survive.
And the only other story that comes to my mind in the Bible, that when you read that verse about a covenant between, for generations to come, the Lord be between us, is Ruth and Naomi.
Oh,
and
right. Right.
They got to move together and stay together.
You're exactly right. That's a great example.
But it was the same. I don't care what the cost is. I'm not giving up my loyalty to you.
Yeah.
So that it's a rare and precious thing, that's for sure. And I think too, some of us are meant to be leaders, and we need the support of others, and some of us are meant to be supporters. And it's like Jonathan, deep down, that what his role was in David's life and in the future of all this. He knew where the most value was for him to place his love and loyalty and devotion.
And it takes a lot of strength to give up power. Or the right to power, or the fight for power. I mean, there's a lot of strength, I think, a testament to the strength of love and friendship, that it can cause you to give up your rightful place in that line of succession, which is something to behold.
It reminded me of, in a goofy way, you remember the movie Love Actually?
Yeah.
And all. Well, remember the fading, aging rock star and his comeback with the Christmas song, and his manager was like Jonathan, and he was like David. He was the one with the ego, and that all the women danced for, or whatever, in his younger days. But at the end of that movie, it was so tender the way that manager showed his loyalty to the to the aging rock star. And it reminded me of these two guys on a lesser level.
So David and Jonathan are this incredible friendship, this incredible story. I know in the evangelical culture that I grew up in, for many people in that culture, being gay was not okay. That was not viewed as an okay thing. And this was a story. So I also want to hold this part of it up as well. This was a story, this friendship between David and Jonathan was a story that some of my friends who would later come out actually took solace in, to see two men in love with one another. So, there's that other side to this story as well, that normalizing love of any kind between two men did provide solace in a culture that was deeply homophobic as well. And so, making sure to highlight that as well, because I know that's also part of the legacy of this story. Now, during the time where this was written, there wasn't that kind of language around same-sex relationships, when this was written. However, over the course of its life in the last 2, 3, 4,000 years, it has been able to provide ongoing solace and a place where folks could see themselves in it. And it triggered me because I've also heard this said about the Naomi and Ruth relationship too. So I have these two warring things in there. I want this to normalize same gender relationships that are platonic, but I also want it to kind of be able to provide that comfort to folks who may be feeling excluded, who may not see themselves represented in the biblical story as fully. So, but Scripture's not univocal. I mean, it can speak in more than one way, right?
And it keeps coming across fresh, because I think when I was younger and read this, that's where I went. I was like, oh my God, they're gay. Well, right. It was like an aha moment,
right?
And I'm glad that's right. The way it's like, this is stability, and the language is beautiful between the two. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
So if folks want to go back and really dive into this, it's 1 Samuel 18, 19, and 21, and then that first chapter in 2 Samuel where you can really see that love, and as David begins to grieve the death of his beloved friend Jonathan. Go back and read those things. Really dive into these stories, because as I've said in the past, this is one of our, ironically, is one of our most human stories I think we encounter over the course of 1st and 2nd Samuel, because there's a lot of stuff that happens, both good and bad. And here I'm so glad we got to talk about a good story, because coming up, we're going to be talking about some not so good stories that happen as well, that are very troublesome. So it's nice to see moments of grace in the midst of violence and bloodshed and a lot of awfulness. So here's a moment of grace where we can really see a reflection of God's love kind of coming through in these complicated people's lives.
Definitely.
Well, Dena, thank you so much for taking the time today, for being with us, for diving into this wonderful story, for your insights. I love the connection between these two being military men. I've never have really put those two things together. So what a great insight to be able to ponder and to think on. So thank you so much, Dena.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
All right, y'all. We'll see y'all next week. Thanks so much.